Welcome to the Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. Tracey, where are we today?
We talk about 2015's Hamilton and Lin-Manuel Miranda, our newest man of the age, I guess you could call him. So this is our 7th show-specific episode in the Tonys on Tour in early 2025. Hamilton won the Tony Award in 2016. So
That's right. It premiered on Broadway in August of 2015. So that made it eligible for the 2016 awards. And this one not only won Best Musical, it also is one of the 10 musicals throughout history that have won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. So I have a special interest in this one because I have a book upcoming about the 10 musicals that have won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. So what I have done in this book, and I may have alluded to it in earlier episodes, but what I've done is basically taken kind of the research that I would do for a podcast episode like this, and I've written it out in prose form so that, it's accessible for classroom use. It's accessible for reading on an airplane, whatever you want to. If you're a Broadway lover, or if you're just interested in history, then it should be interesting, I would hope, for you to read. It comes out this September, and this Hamilton information, I'll have a lot of the same information that you'll hear on today's episode in the book, but also more information. So it'll go a little bit more deeply because I have a little bit more space to talk than I would on an episode here. So stay tuned for that coming out. Now, interestingly, since we're talking Best Musical Tonys in our Tonys on Tour series, I will say that of those 10 musicals, 9 have been presented since the Tony Awards have been awarded. Of the I Sing was the first musical to win a Pulitzer Prize for Drama, but that was 1932 when it won, and we weren't given Tony Awards yet. Subsequently, South Pacific was the second one, and we were giving Tony Awards then. So of the 9 musicals since the advent of Tony Awards to win the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, 7 of them have also won the Best Musical Tony Award. So there's a lot of overlap there, right? The only 2 that haven't are Sunday in the Park with George, which lost to La Cage aux Folles, and Next
was
to
a
Normal.
huge upset.
Yeah, right. And Jerry Herman had a lot to say about it.
Yes, he did.
Maybe
Go
somebody
watch
will want to
that
hear a
on
little bit more to
YouTube.
that story.
Yeah.
So La Cage aux Folles beat out Sunday in the Park with George, and Next to Normal lost to Billy Elliot. So anyway, but there's some that Next to Normal story is one that's very interesting to tell. So when you get the book in September, check out Next to Normal, and it's kind of scandalous Pulitzer Prize for Drama award win. There's a little teaser for you. So at any rate, this is one of those shows. Hamilton is one of those shows that double dipped, winning not only the Best Musical Tony Award, but also the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. And Tracey, before we get started talking about the development of Hamilton, I just want to know, what was your first encounter with this show, which seems to be, on the Mount Rushmore
of shows
of recent mega hits. What was your first encounter with it?
You know what? I think my first encounter, obviously, I had, teaching musical theater, I had heard about the Hamilton mixtape when he did the that kind of preview performance at the White House, and I forget what year that was. Do you remember?
2009.
Was that 2009? So I had heard that this thing was coming because I was in DC. I had heard about it, and it was like, oh, it's a musical about Alexander Hamilton. And at that point, Alexander Hamilton was a name that I knew of, but I didn't know I didn't know hardly anything about his history because he's not one of those founding fathers that we talk about in school. Right. And my response was, what is Lin-Manuel doing? Lin has lost it. Like I went, he's writing a musical about what? I mean, granted, I'm the girl that produced the musical about Crazy Mary Lincoln. So, I don't have much to talk, but
right.
I remember thinking that it was crazy in 2009. 2015, 14 rolls around, and they were doing an in-town tryout before Broadway at the Public, I believe.
Yep.
And the public, I had bought ticket. We were going there for, we used to go on spring break. I mean, everybody else did too, because, it's a theater department. We'd all get on a plane and go to New York and see all the shows during spring break. And so we had tickets for something at the public, and they bumped it for this Hamilton thing. And and they didn't transfer it over. So I didn't get tickets to see Hamilton then. And I remember just being like, well, that's a bummer. I'm a little irked about that, blah, 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 and kind of went on with my life. And then I was like, oh dear, this is huge, isn't it? So right after that, we started getting some of those initial reviews about how amazing it was. And then the following spring break, we saw the original cast. I think I sat 3 rows from the back.
Oh my gosh, but so worth it. That's when you spent your rent to go see it, right?
I spent an entire month's rent for 2 tickets. 2 tickets. And
hashtag worth it.
Most definitely worth it. And nobody else could get tickets to it. So I was like, we were like the only ones that saw it that year. And so we were very, very cool. And like, awesome. I had like 50 children who were like, I need a program. So I'm like, they're swiping programs from people and carrying them out to give to little BFA theater students who are like standing outside the door wanting, all this. So, but that's it. I mean, we've seen it several times on tour. After that, we took my in-laws to see it as a Christmas present. It's been a big part of kind of like our viewing history. Yeah. Pre-pandemic, right in that moment. So when did you finally see it?
Well, for me, it was very different because I kept hearing about it, and I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon, I'm ashamed to say. And because I wasn't in academic theater, it wasn't necessary that I stay current, right? Yeah. That wasn't as necessary for me because I was speaking about shows that had already done Broadway and were touring the country. So I had a little bit of a different perspective. And so with this Hamilton thing, as it was gathering steam and I'm hearing about it, and I'm like, I'm just being an awful, dreadful curmudgeon. And I don't know why. I just was like, it can't be that good. Yeah, right? It just can't be that good. And I just decided I was going to be part of the resistance and say no. I mean, that was my big rebellion. I'm just going to resist.
We all have that moment. All of us. I'm like, this is not going to be good. Okay.
It cannot be as good as they say, right? Yeah. Well, so then my children were, I guess it would have been, 2015. And my children were, whenever the cast album came out, which I don't remember.
It came out in the fall of 2015.
Okay.
Because we listened to it on the way down to, I think,
perfect,
Thanksgiving or something like that. That's what I remember listening to in the car.
Okay. So my children had they were 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. They were little, and they had something at our church, like a day camp or something. And I was all for the free child care. So I dropped them off.
Love it.
And on my way home, I stopped at Barnes & Noble and I picked up the big, thick libretto and the book. And I remember getting that. And I remember deciding, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take one for the team. And I will tell you, I wept. Wept and wept and wept and wept and wept at the brilliance of this work. And I will say, I think this happens a lot for historians. I don't know if you've had this experience, but for me, I became a theater historian because musical theater makes me weep a lot. At least it did historically, right? Yes. It was because I was so emotionally impacted by it. But the more that you're around it and the more that you're doing it, it becomes very rote. It becomes very this is my job. This is what I do. And it doesn't impact you in the same way. Hamilton impacted me in the same way, Ragtime impacted me as a college sophomore, junior, whatever I was. You know what I mean? When I sit there listening to it or watching it and the tears are streaming down my face. And I was just amazed at the brilliance of it and ashamed that it had taken me so long to come around to what the rest of the world already knew, which was that it was just a work of genius. Yeah. So
I do something very similar in the fact that now I won't listen to the soundtrack until I've actually seen the show. Yeah. I made that rule for myself, because if I know it all ahead of time and then I go see the show, it's so easy for me to disconnect from why I love it to begin with. So if
Totally
I know
agree.
nothing about it and I walk into that, into that theater, it's so helpful having done this for 20 some odd years that
Yeah.
now I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, now I remember why this is,
Why I do what I
why I
do.
do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I totally get it. We both understand how great it is, but I want to give some accolades from another source as I start our conversation today. First Lady Michelle Obama, or former First Lady Michelle Obama, called this the greatest work of art that I have ever seen in any medium.
Mm-hmm.
And, it sounds like hyperbole, but I tend to agree with her. I mean, as
Mm-hmm.
far as what I have experienced, I think she's spot on. It
Yeah.
is brilliant. It is
Especially
brilliant.
in its historical moment. Like, I think that we are going to look back on that statement and be like, oh, that's kind of,
It's
hyperbole. But in
big. Yeah,
that
it's
that
big.
moment, sitting from where we're sitting now, 10 years past,
Yeah,
our world has changed significantly, and I think we need to
right.
reference that. And
Yeah.
but in that particular moment, this was something that we had never seen anything like this, and it really was just, it was a work of brilliance. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it starts, of course, with the man of the hour, Lin-Manuel Miranda. So, what I'm
Yes.
going to do today is I'm just going to dig into Lin-Manuel's life. I'm going to dig into what was kind of some motivating moments for him to create first In the Heights and then Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll just see where this conversation takes us. But let's start off with Lin-Manuel Miranda. He was born in 1980, actually in January 16th. He
He
shares
is
my sister's
younger than
birthday.
us.
He is younger than us.
It's
And
weird.
Tracey, dare I say it, way more successful.
Oh, yes. The man has a foundation that runs his life. They sit around a table and they're like, this is what we think you should do next. I'm like, yeah, no, this is not. This is a different level of success.
No, totally. At any rate, he was born in 1980, raised in Inwood Hill Park on the northern tip of Manhattan. He was raised by his father, Louis, who was a political strategist, and his mother, Luz, a clinical psychologist. Now, his dad, Louis, was born and raised in Puerto Rico. And this is going to be important in a few minutes. So I'm going to go into his bio just a tiny bit. He was born and raised in Puerto Rico and then came to NYU to study psychology. That's where he met Lin-Manuel's mother.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the youngest student ever accepted into NYU's graduate program in clinical psychology. So already you can see where Lin-Manuel's genius may come from. He's got brilliant parents. Like I said, his father was a native of Puerto Rico. His mother had grown up in New Jersey, but nevertheless was of Puerto Rican and Mexican American descent. So there were Latino influences on both sides of Lin-Manuel's family. And it was very important to both of his parents that they really preserve and protect that heritage. So a number of ways that they did that. One is he was raised bilingual. His father spoke Spanish in the home. His mother spoke English. Another way was that they would send their two children, Lin-Manuel and his sister Luz, to Puerto Rico every summer. They would spend their summers in Puerto Rico, so that they really knew their home, right? They knew their culture, their native culture. And that was really, really important to his parents. So interestingly, while he would be in Puerto Rico in the summers, his grandfather, who ran a credit union, would bring home the security camera from the credit union where he worked. And Lin-Manuel would use that to make videos. So he'd wear that little camcorder and go around. He'd stage shows with action figures, or he'd film himself doing amazing stunts, just whatever he could do for storytelling. He was all about the telling the story. And then he'd show the family the videos that he had made. So that was a big part of his summers in Puerto Rico. Back at home, he and his sister both grew up attending Hunter College campus schools on the Upper East Side. So, they weren't going to their neighborhood schools. They were going to these magnet schools for gifted children, as they both were very gifted, very bright kids. He in particular started taking piano lessons, and at an early recital, he was about 6 years old when he had a recital, and it was really his first taste of getting a lot of applause. And so he plays one song at this recital, and he gets some applause and he kind of loves it. And then he plays song number 2 and he gets even more applause. And suddenly he's screaming, I know more. Let me keep playing, because he didn't want to leave the stage. And it was kind of one of those moments they needed one of those hooks to pull him off, like in the vaudeville days. He was hooked. He was hooked on applause, hooked on performing from that very early age. The problem was he grew up with a father who loved musical theater and grew up listening to cast albums all the time. Mm-hmm. But the problem for this little 6-year-old kid growing up with parents who were of Puerto Rican descent and Mexican-American descent, and his mother, he didn't see himself represented in the shows that he was listening to with his father, right? If he's listening to My Fair Lady and Oklahoma and, The Music Man, all the greats of the golden age, he's not seeing himself represented outside of West Side Story, right? Yeah.
And
he's not
and in
seeing
that
himself.
one, they don't, it doesn't come off very well, does it?
Exactly.
The Puerto Ricans don't come off as, it's like, uh-oh.
Exactly. So he was learning and listening to the canon of musical theater. He knew it backwards and forwards, but he didn't see a place for himself. He didn't know how to insert himself into that canon because he wasn't represented anywhere that he could see. Now, as far as going to the theater, they went to the theater some when he was a child, not often. He remembers seeing Les Mis and Phantom and Cats, kind of the big ones.
Yes.
But yeah, right. But other than that, he didn't go to the theater a whole lot until his 17th birthday, when his girlfriend gave him tickets to see Rent. And this is one of those life-changing moments for Lin-Manuel Miranda. He sees it and he suddenly is blown away by the fact that it's a contemporary story, right? That wasn't something that he had heard on his dad's cast albums, contemporary stories. And dealing with contemporary issues, things that were relevant to people like him, right? Things that were he talked about it as he would say, here I'm seeing a cast as diverse as the people I rode the subway with. It looks like his community, and the issues that they were grappling with were things that were his friends were grappling with in a lot of ways. So that was very, very impactful. In fact, he said about it, he said, from this moment, nothing is ever the same again for him.
For a lot of people. For a lot of artists. And it's a watershed moment, even though we all kind of debate whether or not Rent would have made it if it hadn't have been for the death of Jonathan Larson and
that's right,
and the publicity, which is an awful thing to say, that brought to it.
Yep.
It's interesting.
And if you want to know more about that, there is a chapter in the Pulitzer Prize winners by
Kristin
Stultz Pressley. Coming in September 2025.
I was doing that just to plug your book.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Rent is another of the 10 musicals that won Best Musical and the Pulitzer Prize. So when Lin-Manuel Miranda sees it, he's blown away. He sees people like him. He sees contemporary issues. And then more specific than just in general, right? People that like I ride the subway with, he sees a guy with a camcorder. And remember when he was a kid in Puerto Rico, and he was wearing that camcorder on his shoulder all the time. So in the character of Mark Cohen, he truly sees himself. And he wrote in the New York Times, I believe it was in the New York Times, he wrote, Rent whispered to me, your stories are just as valid as the ones in the shows you've seen. These were not phantoms or revolutionaries in Paris or cats. They lived in the village right downtown. Yeah. And that's really, really important in his development as a musical theater writer, because it almost gives him permission to write about his own experience. Yeah. Then the next year, he saw another show. He saw the show The Cape Man. Now, if we know anything about The Cape Man, we know that it is one of the biggest flops in Broadway history. So it did not run for long, but nevertheless, it had music by Paul Simon, and it was co-written with Darryl Walcott. And it was about it was based on a true story. It was about a Puerto Rican gang member who murders 2 teens in Hell's Kitchen in 1959. And he wears this cape as he does it. Thus the title, The Cape Man.
So this is one of those moments. Like if you look back to our episode, the timeline episodes, this is that part in the 1990s where they're throwing stuff at the wall.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Right. When we talk about like all of a sudden we start getting jukebox musicals, Paul Simon and things like this that we're just throwing, trying to figure out, because remember, a good portion of our creators have died at this point, and musical theater is very much rebuilding at the end of the 90s and trying to kind of figure out. So it's really interesting. He's like, I saw The Cape Man. It's a very big flop. But yeah, that's one of those like 700, names that we wrote out on the board during one of our classes one time. So yeah.
Yes. So when he sees The Cape Man, of course, his first thought is, wait, there's Puerto Ricans. This is the show for me. I'll just be in The Cape Man. Well,
and then
when the show closed not long after he saw it, that he had to kind of go back to the drawing board on that plan. But when it did close, he thought to himself, it was like the universe saying, no one is going to make your dream musical, so you have to do it.
Yeah.
He later said, no one was going to write the great Latino musical, so I thought I'd take a crack at it.
Yeah.
Which ends up being foreboding. So this is like 98. And
he's 18.
Already, right.
full of moxie. Wonder and moxie in his heart. In his heart. And
and we love him for it. Now already he had been writing little short, absurd musicals that, were not to be published. They were just because he was full of ideas. And in fact, one was called Nightmare in D Major, which was about a pig who tries to dissect the show's main character. So instead of the character dissecting the pig, he flipped it on its back.
This is something that he wrote because science class was getting a little bit overwhelming, wasn't it? He's like, we're writing this, and this is like the year that I did chemistry and didn't listen at all because I had no idea what the man was talking about.
Right.
I'm going to write a musical. I love it.
Yeah. We all had one of those, didn't we? So at any rate, so then he goes to college, he goes to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. And something else is, we've talked about some kind of really essential moments in his life. The first being seeing Rent, when he saw contemporary stories written about people like him, when he thought my stories are just as valid as any other story. And then The Cape Man, when he sees a Puerto Rican and he realized when it closed, nobody's going to write the great Latino musical, so I need to do it myself. Well, another moment for him was living in La Casa in the sophomore year at Middletown University. La Casa is the dormitory for Latino students. And he had not really grown up surrounded by a lot of other Latinos. His neighborhood was not, certainly Washington Heights, where he set in the Heights was, but that was not his experience in Inwood Hill Park. So this was the first time he'd really been surrounded with people who shared his heritage to this degree, right? And it was enormously impactful. And so he decides he's going to write a contemporary musical, and it's going to be about other Latinos like him, like himself, like those he lived with in La Casa. And he applies, this is his great idea, he applies to Wesleyan's student-run second stage organization to have his not yet written show be a part of their spring 2020 season. And he gets in. So he
2020? No,
20. I'm sorry. I'm 2000. So sorry. 2000. Thank you for catching that.
Oh my gosh.
Boy, we'd have to do some kind of correction with that, wouldn't we? Yes. Thank you for catching that. Yeah. 2000, spring of 2000. He's approved. The performance takes place the weekend of April 20th. And In the Heights is, of course, what that production was. Now, it was very, very, very different from the In the Heights that premiered on Broadway. But nevertheless, that was the genesis. This was what kicked things off. And he said, I put in all the things I'd always wanted to see on stage: propulsive rap, scenes outside of bodegas, salsa numbers that also revealed character and story. So this little show was about an 80-minute one act with 14 songs. That's a lot of singing for 80 minutes, right? Like I said, it was very different from the version that would later open on Broadway. And it was set in Washington Heights. And the reason he set it in Washington Heights instead of his own neighborhood was because he said it's more well-known, it's more iconic, and it sings better, right? Yeah. In the Heights. That's just, it's much catchier than Inwood Hill Park, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was a practical issue that caused him to change the setting. Well, what he notices,
but it really is. It may be about his experience, but it's also not about his experience. And I think that's what's so interesting about it, because most people, when they see In the Heights and they know the story and they know that he took over the lead part, I'm always just so baffled, because I'm like, Usnavi is from the Dominican Republic. He's not from Puerto Rico.
That's right.
It's not Lin-Manuel Miranda.
That's a great point.
It is not.
It is not a biomusical.
It is
by
not.
Any stretch. Right.
This was not his experience in life, but it is something that he did know, and he, you know, had experience with, and had friends that lived this. You know, you start drawing on the inspiration from those around you, but it is not a bio,
right?
Which is, you know, an important thing, I think, for us to realize, because I think it does kind of get wrapped up in, oh, his stories, he's from this, but no, he's not. He's from Little Park.
Yeah, 2 miles north. Yeah. No, and I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, he only took on the role of Usnavi because when they were workshopping it, the turnaround times for those workshops were so fast that nobody else could learn the lyrics. The rap was so fast and so intricate that nobody else could learn it. So he was like, well, heck with it. I'll just do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
So that was not the intent. He was not writing that role for himself to perform at the time that he wrote it. It just ended up being that way. But what he notices at that Wesleyan performance in April of 2000 is that there is a massive reaction from the audience when there is hip hop music. Those hip hop moments really resonated with the audience. And if you know that score at all, you know that he's kind of hedging his bets. He wants to be, you know, he wants to ground what he's doing in the musical theater tradition. So, you know, he talks about it's too darn hot, like my man Cole Porter says.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? He wants to ground it in musical theater tradition and then bring sounds that are completely new to that tradition. But what he finds is that people are excited about this new sound, this new, I mean, I guess you'd call it hip hop, which was another big influence on him. His father was listening to cast albums. His sister, who was 6 years older, was listening to hip hop. So he had, you know, both of those things going on in his head throughout his childhood. So he remembered that. Even from 2000, he remembered it. Now, something else important happened at that production. In the audience was a fellow Wesleyan student who was about to graduate. His name was John Buffalo Mahler. You might recognize that name, Mahler. And yes, he is the son of Pulitzer Prize winner Norman Mahler. And he, like I said, was about to graduate. And his plan after college was to move to New York City and, with a couple of other Wesleyan graduates, start a theater company. And so that's what he did. Now, after he saw In the Heights at Wesleyan, he calls his buddy who had already graduated from Wesleyan, Tommy Kail. Tommy Kail was one of the guys who was going to start that theater company with him. Interestingly, Tommy Kail had studied history at Wesleyan, but nevertheless was going to start this theater company in New York with John Buffalo Mahler and company. And he calls Kail and says, listen, this kid's got something. We need to produce this. When we start our company, we need to produce this. And so that's exactly what they did. They started their company, Back Course Productions, in 2001. They started it. You may be familiar with this, dear listener. They started it in the basement of the Drama Bookshop, which was then at West 40th Street. Why are you laughing?
Everything comes full circle when they buy the Drama Bookshop.
Exactly. More famously, years later, when the Drama Bookshop is in dire straits, who swoops in to save it?
Tommy Kail and Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Exactly. So it's because of this. It's because they had that basement space, 60-seat basement space at West 40th Street. In 2002, so a year after they had opened at the Drama Bookshop, Lin-Manuel graduates, and Back Course, as promised, workshops In the Heights. Tommy Kail, history major extraordinaire, directs it. And they end up over the next several years doing about 5 workshops of this production. I'm not going to go into detail about how it got to Broadway, but just suffice it to say, I'm going to truncate this and say it got to
history.
Broadway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's another podcast episode at some point, but we're going to stick with the Hamilton train for now. Just know that it premiered on Broadway in March of 2008 at the Richard Rodgers Theater. Yes. Tracey, what?
No, I just was like, because we haven't gotten to Hamilton yet.
Right, we're not there yet. And it's been, what, 30 minutes?
It's okay.
40?
It's okay.
Are we at 40?
Well, we're not at 40, but
well, I do feel
there.
Right, I feel like this is important to understand what propelled him to do what he did. You know, like,
because In the Heights has a huge response. If you've talked about the response from the very, very first showing of this kind of melding of current pop music and the musical theater canon, and how that just everybody's like, nobody's ever thought to do this before. But I mean, if you think about it, the musical theater canon was pop music, so why nobody thought to do this was kind of crazy. I mean, it does work. It does work very, very well. But the response to In the Heights when it got to Broadway was significant.
Yes.
It's not going to be what Hamilton was, but it is very significant. It is a huge, huge watershed moment, and kind of, we're still trying to figure out, I think, as historians, where to put all of this stuff and what it means, and where, what it solidifies and what comes after it. But In the Heights is, I mean, I think it's going to end up being very, very important.
No question.
Not just in Lynn's biography, it's going to be important in the overall arching kind of scheme of things. So
and to your point, I mean, it won Best Musical, the Tony Award for Best Musical, and it was considered, though it didn't win, but it was considered for the Pulitzer Prize. So it was a very important show. It ran, I think, for about 1,500 performances, if I'm not mistaken. So it had a very healthy run for an original work by an unknown composer.
Yeah.
Right? Unknown at the time.
And big names that wanted to step into those roles.
Right.
Once the original cast started dropping out, like big, Disney stars, and big names that you really knew. It generated a lot of love. So
yeah. So it's while In the Heights is running on Broadway that Lin-Manuel, who was starring as Usnavi, like we have already discussed, because
Usnavi, my favorite name in all.
Isn't that great?
Isn't it great? It was brilliant. It really said U.S. Navy. Amazing.
So nobody could pick up the intricacy of the rap quite like he could in those early days, and so he just continued performing it, and he plays the role on Broadway. Well, at his first vacation after the show premieres, he takes a break, as richly deserved after all the work that he'd done. And he decides he's going to pick up a book to read on the trip. You walk through the airport, you see a book, like a beach read.
A beach read.
And he just happens, his beach read and my beach read is very different. His happened to be like an 850-page biography about a founding father written by a Pulitzer Prize winning historian named Ron Chernow. So he picks up the book Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, and he takes it to Mexico with him, and he lays in a hammock, and by the end of the second chapter, he says, "This is my next show." Like, this is it. Because in that story, he saw a couple of things that felt very familiar to him, even though Alexander Hamilton himself could not have been less like him in a lot of ways, right? But what he saw when he looked at the life of Alexander Hamilton was his dad, right? Hamilton was a Caribbean islander who had come to the U.S. to study in New York City.
Which you would
never know. What did his dad do? No.
You would never know that. We didn't know any of that until this musical. I was like, why is he painted so white in all of these pictures?
Yes.
And then it's like, oh.
Yeah.
But he does see his dad, doesn't he? It's amazing.
He does see his dad. He sees his dad as that brilliant kid who comes from a Caribbean island nation, Puerto Rico in the case of his dad, comes to New York to study. And that resonated very deeply with him. And then the other thing was he sees all this infighting of the founding fathers, and he immediately thinks of the hip hop moguls, right? And they're back and forth, and they're beef with each other. And the two things just click in his brain, and he says, "This is my next show."
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, kudos to him too, because the history that we are taught in school is not what actually happened. To believe my elementary school and high school teachers, this, democracy was angelic. It was rained down upon us, and we all held hands and sang Kumbaya while we created the Constitution without any bickering or fighting.
No disagreements.
Disagreement. It just, democracy was laid at our feet, and we took it as a grand gift. We fought like mad over what should be in there. And it's been fun to kind of recover that history. And I think it's an interesting point to kind of bring up now, because there were a lot of people who were like, he's rewriting history. This didn't actually happen because of how we've been teaching history.
They hadn't learned that. We didn't learn that.
We didn't learn that. And when you start really digging into it, you're like, oh no, these people fought and tried to win and played dirty too. These were actual people. These are not people that we've put them on pedestals, but these are humans that react as humans today do. And every once in a while, I think you need that kind of historical rain check. You need that check on your stories. And this was very much a moment where we needed that. 2015, we still need it. It's like, this was hard fought. This wasn't,
it wasn't clean and pretty. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, what you'd been taught, because I was obviously taught the same thing. But Lin-Manuel Miranda had written a paper about Alexander Hamilton in high school. And he says when he picked up that book by turnout, all he remembered was that he had died in a duel.
Yeah.
Which is all I could tell you. I remember learning he died in a duel. That's all I knew. He was killed by Aaron Burr. End of story.
Yeah. The only reason I knew that, the milk commercial.
Milk. I don't.
Do you remember that milk commercial? Oh, the cast spoofed it and they put it out as a commercial again. But the milk commercial, where it was like, there's this guy and he's listening to the radio and he's making himself a peanut butter sandwich, right? And he bites, and it's an Alexander Hamilton museum, and it's like, for $1 million, sir, who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? And he's like, they pan to the bullet, they pan to the but he's got peanut butter in his mouth, and he's like, hold on, let me get some milk. He's like, Aaron Burr, and they're like, excuse me, hold on, let me get the milk. And then there's no milk, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, your time is out. And he's like, but Aaron Burr, because he can't I can't believe
I do not remember
this.
That. I'm going to find it.
We have to put it on all the social medias.
We will find it for the socials.
Aaron, what is his name? Who played Aaron Burr, whose name is escaping me.
Leslie Odom Jr.
Leslie Odom Jr. They recreated it with him.
Oh my gosh.
And it was
did not know this.
Hilarious. But yeah,
I can't
remember
believe
that.
I missed that.
That's the only reason I never was taught about the dual part, but that's the only reason I knew that, is because that commercial was hilarious.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Go figure.
That's so interesting. I know. I'm totally going to look that up for sure. No doubt about it. So at any rate, that's all he remembered when he picked up the book. But I think that familiarity is probably what made him pick up the book. Like, oh, I knew he died in a duel, but there's 850 pages
worth of information of him, right? Out of that? Wow.
Maybe there's more to the story. So at any rate, he reads it. He decides very early in his reading of it that it's his next show. And when he gets back, he's pretty quickly connected with Chernow, who lives in New York as well. And Chernow comes to a Sunday matinee performance of In the Heights. And afterwards, he meets backstage with Miranda. And Miranda tells him at the time, he's like, this is my next show. I want to turn this into, not at the time a show, but a concept album.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But he's saying, I want to make a concept album out of this. And Chernow, utters that famous phrase, that's a terrible idea. Like, I'm not sure this is the right fit, right? I'm not sure the life of Alexander Hamilton is fodder for a rap battle. I just don't know that that's where we need to go with this. Yeah. But Lin-Manuel Miranda was pretty insistent that it was. Now, very briefly, concept albums. So we've talked about these in the past and multiple times in other episodes. Really, we see it for the first time in Broadway, as it pertains to Broadway, with Jesus Christ Superstar, the Brown album, as it was called, because it was, in fact, a Brown album. Nobody was willing to produce Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, who were at the time, unknowns. Nobody was willing to produce
with
their
the title,
musical,
like Jesus Christ Superstar.
Exactly. And they were definitely not on board when they found out it was about the life of Jesus from the perspective of Judas. And so they decided, well, you know what? We'll just make an album and see what happens. And in fact, they did. So when it opens on Broadway, I believe in 1971, it has a built-in audience, people who'd fallen in love with this album already. They then did that again with Evita. We saw ABBA, the two male creators from ABBA, do it with Tim Rice on Chess in the mid-1980s. So it is a thing that is done. Now, it hasn't been done a lot in recent memory, but Miranda decides that's what he's going to do with this. And part of that, the rationale for that, I think, again, hedging his bets. He's not sure if he's ready to go all in on hip hop on Broadway because he's not sure how it will be received if I try to tell the story this way. So I'll make it a concept album to kind of test the waters.
And there was precedent for this, not just from the 1970s, but late 90s, early 2000s. There's a lot of these concept musical albums rolling around. They're not getting up the kind of play because they're still theater shows. So like it just didn't work the same way it did in the 70s, where 70s people were following this, had that built-in audience because they had but if you look at a lot of the shows that Wildhorn does, he does tons of these and
Jekyll and Hyde, Scarlet Pimpernel. That's
Scarlet
right.
Pimpernel, I think, has one.
Forgot about those.
But it's right. Jekyll and Hyde that I remember going, that one and Dracula. Both.
Oh, that's right.
And it's like for some reason that they weren't hitting on the right thing. And so, let's put out a concept album. I mean, obviously, let's see if we can make some money off of this because it's not getting to Broadway quickly. And part of that is the escalating cost of Broadway that's happening right at this moment, and the fact that Broadway's having this huge resurgence. They're remodeling Broadway. Everything's happening all at the same time. But I mean, there's precedent for that in this moment. A lot of people are doing it because they're like, there ain't no way I'm going to raise this much money for a show about Alexander Hamilton.
Right. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought up Wildhorn because I had completely forgotten about those, but you're absolutely right. That's a great point. So at any rate, that's what he's going to do. It's going to be called the Hamilton Mixtape. Mixtape, of course, if you're Gen Xers like us, you immediately know what that means. But a mixtape was where you would get a cassette and you would get, say the original cassette of Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation. And then you would put on your double-decker cassette recorder. You would play Janet Jackson from one and then record your favorite Janet Jackson song on the other tape. And then maybe you'd get Paula Abdul's Forever Your Girl cassette and pop that in and put your favorite song right after the Janet Jackson song. So you're really making a playlist.
Yes.
But back then it took a lot more work to do it.
Mixtape.
It was called a mixtape. And you did this for your friends, for your girlfriends, for your boyfriends, people you really cared about. You made them a mixtape. So it was called the Hamilton Mixtape. Now, around this time, Miranda gets an invitation to perform at the White House in May of 2009. Tracy's alluded to this earlier in our conversation, but this was an evening of poetry, music, and the spoken word held in the East Room of the White House. I believe it was the first such event held by President and Mrs. Obama after their inauguration, after President Obama had been inaugurated. This was the first big arts event, and Miranda was invited to be a part of it. Another guy invited was James Earl Jones, who did an address from Othello. I mean, there were a number of people involved in this. And while it was assumed that Miranda would perform something from In the Heights, which was still running on Broadway, he decides instead he's going to try out the opening number, which was all at the time that had been written. Of
a great American, Alexander Hamilton. And then he runs. Yeah.
And everybody laughs.
And because they don't believe him. They don't believe. They're like, oh, ha, ha.
Sure.
Oh, he's serious. Oh. You've got it. If you're going to go see the show and you've never seen the show, go watch that first because it is great.
Yes. And I will put that on the socials, at least a clip of it, because it's long. Not super long. It's short enough to watch, too long for social media. But at any rate, so this clip of the opening number, of which again was the only thing that had been written at the time of the Hamilton mixtape, goes viral. It sounds almost, there's a few lyric changes between now and then, but for the most part, it remains intact to this day. And the clip that was posted on YouTube by the White House goes viral. I mean, it's like an overnight
And this is when I said, what is he thinking?
Yeah.
Like, what? I mean, it's because it wasn't that it wasn't good. It was cool, but it was like, an entire musical?
Right.
Where are we going with this? This is going to be interesting. And it was like, is there enough there? Like,
Yes. I think a lot of people felt that way, except for Tommy Kail. Tommy Kail, remember the director, fellow Wesleyan grad and director of In the Heights. He saw it and he assumed this will be his next show. Yeah. He assumed that, but Miranda was still hedging his bets. He was just not sure he was going all in on it. And so he keeps writing on it, but writing is very slow. And the reason for that is he was busy with a lot of other projects after the success of In the Heights. I mean, he's got his improv group, Freestyle Love Supreme, going, which still performs at different times, and is great. If you want to learn more about mixtapes, look up Mixtape and Freestyle Love Supreme on YouTube because it's awesome. But he did new lyrics and some translated lyrics for the 2009 revival of West Side Story,
which was excellent. Go ahead. Which is excellent. It gets him in contact with Stephen Sondheim. And if you know history, most of us kind of look at Lin-Manuel. He's our next Sondheim. Right. However you want to look at that as far as like the American genius of musical theater. He's kind of that next thing. But the stuff that he does on West Side Story, because he is bilingual and being able to put Spanish language back into that show and do it well enough that Sondheim is with him, and he's learning from Sondheim at the same time. Yes, write slowly, Lynn, because you are going to be better for it. Very, very smart.
No question. So he's got that going. He's also, in 2012, he's working on Bring It On the Musical, which he co-wrote with Jeff Whitty of Avenue Q and Tom Kitt of Next to Normal and High Fidelity and Amanda Green.
Bring It On.
Yeah, Bring It On the Musical, a movie adaptation. But he was really busy, and Mary Poppins comes not long after this. So, there were some practical reasons why he was dragging his feet, but also I don't think he had a very clear vision for what it was going to be yet. He wasn't there yet. And so Tommy Kail, who still insisted that this was a show and not a mixtape, said, I tell you what, if I book a showcase for you, will that help you to stay on track? Will that help you to keep plugging away at writing? And so Lynn agrees, and Kail books him into the Lincoln Center Songbook series. And so that's that was started as a way to showcase great American writers. And so he was booked into that series January 11th, Hamilton's birthday of 2012. And, still the show was not finished, but he had enough to do some tracks, and he sampled some different songs, both from Sondheim and from Alicia Keys and, some of his own music. And I think he sampled, if I'm remembering correctly, Sondheim's Another 100 People Just Got Off of the Train from Company with, is it Empire, the New York song, Alicia Keys, what is that song?
Empire State of Mind?
Yes. Is that right? In New York? Yeah. That's it.
I think so.
Whatever that song is. I don't know the name of it.
We're all singing it. We're like, you know that one.
You know what it is. You know which one I'm talking about. He sampled those two songs together. So there was a number of things like that. And then there were pieces from the Hamilton mixtape. This company included Gavin Creel, the late, great Gavin Creel, Mandy Gonzalez, James Monroe Iglehart, who won a Tony for playing the genie in Aladdin, and Christopher Jackson. So we've got, some future Hamilton alum and people that had worked on In the Heights, just some Broadway heavyweights who are part of this. And after he saw the reaction to this 2012 songbook series, it was clear it was not a mixtape. It was a musical.
This is a musical, and we need to do something with it.
Yeah, there's more here. And so the next stop was the Powerhouse Theater in Poughkeepsie, New York, which was put on with Vassar College and the New York Film Association, I believe, something like that. Anyway, there were 2 readings done of the Hamilton mixtape in 2000. This would be 13, and both of the readings sold out immediately. Again, the momentum is building. And so that brings Lynn into a conversation with Oscar Eustis. Oscar Eustis was the artistic director of the Public Theater, which we've talked about a lot. And the Public Theater, had produced shows like Hair and A Chorus Line, among many others. And when Oscar Eustis, who became the artistic director in 2005, saw the clip of Miranda performing Alexander Hamilton at the White House, he immediately wanted to produce the show and workshop it at the Public. But he had to spend the next 3 years convincing Miranda that that was the thing to do. So after the Powerhouse Theater, after the Lincoln Songbook series, Miranda's finally saying, okay, I get it. You're right. This is a show. Let's do it. So then they agree to workshop the show at the Public Theater. That show premiered in February of 2015, was an outrageous hit. But first, a moment about the casting. A lot has been said, a lot of ink has been spilled about the casting in Hamilton, and we don't have time to go into it in real great detail. But I do want to say, for those who wonder about it, this is the explanation that Lynn gave. He said, our cast looks like America looks now, and it's very intentional. It's a way of pulling you into the story and allowing you to leave whatever cultural baggage you have about the founding fathers at the door.
Yeah. I just want to mention that Chernow was... it said the same thing. Like, I have to give Lin-Manuel a lot of credit, because he sat down with Ron a lot over to make sure that Ron knew the arc of the story and didn't feel like it was misleading in places, and musical theater writers rarely do that. So, he was concerned about the history as well, and not trying to make Alexander Hamilton into somebody that he wasn't, trying to make him into a big hero. Like, how do we do this, and how do we do this faithfully? But, Ron was giving an interview after Broadway opened, and I'm trying to be as faithful as I can with the memory that I have here. But he said, we had all of this multi-ethnicity of these characters, and I remember going, I don't know about this. This is not faithful in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think this is kosher. And he goes, and Lynn just looked up at me and put his head back down, and we went on with the conversation. He's like, I'm here to tell you today that the strength of the show and the strength of America is in the diversity of the cast. That's absolutely, that's where we see this. And that he's like, I am saying that Lynn was right in this moment. Cause the show really does. It shakes you up when you get there and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't what I was taught. Right. And it's like you've got a whole bunch of people who are Googling, was George Washington black? No. But when you write down was Alexander Hamilton a brown immigrant? Yes, he was. And so it's like those kinds of questions, and saying, okay, so we have this one way of looking at the founding fathers, and it may not be accurate. And because it's not accurate, we've kind of disconnected it from the strength of America to begin with, which is that kind of, which is in our diversity, in the melting pot, in all of these different kind of ideologies that people from all backgrounds working together for a common cause. That's what makes us Americans.
Yeah.
Not who we were born to.
Right.
It's that looking at that Constitution. It's buying into democracy.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought Chernow up again, because I left out something that I think is key. And that is, in that meeting after the matinee of In the Heights, Miranda asked him to be the historical consultant for the show, or for the mixtape at the time. And the reason for that is because he wanted historians to take it seriously. He did not want it to be fanfic. You know, he did not want it to be based on the true story. He wanted it to be as true as it could. Now, there were some moments when he took some creative liberties. One of those ways is in the number of children Eliza and Alexander have. Like, I think they had 8 or 9 kids, and we see on the stage 1. That's one way. Another way, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna, is that there is no verifiable record of any sort of relationship between Alexander and Angelica. That's completely imagined.
And Angelica and Eliza had an older brother, so Angelica was not the only person that needed, you know, like, so. Right. But those things don't change the,
Right. There was some creative liberty taken, but not nearly as much as you would have expected. Yeah. And one of those reasons was because it was so important to him that it stand historically
on its feet,
accurate. Yeah. And so Ron Chernow, being a part of that as a Pulitzer Prize winning historian, was a big piece of making sure that happened. But like, you're right too, that there were things that Chernow had to just say, okay, I'll let that one go. You know, like,
well,
okay.
But I think he does a good job of, even after the fact, and it's what makes this such a great crossover work of supporting it in its. A lot of historians I know would get to this point, see like that the world is blowing up about it, and then be like, well, I told him not to do that. It's like, no, like, this is, yes, it's based on the book. Read the book. Go read the book. The book is what I think happened, you know, like, that's where it is.
Yes.
We've had to art takes liberties, but art has not taken liberties in this particular case so much that we don't, you know, that it doesn't resemble anything accurate in any way, shape, or form. Exactly. So he does stand behind it, which is nice.
Exactly. So back to the public theater production, it premieres February 2015, massive hit from the very early goings. It's extended multiple times. It's supposed to close in March, then it was extended to April, then it was extended finally to May 3rd, at which point it had to close because it was opening on Broadway in August at the Richard Rodgers Theater, where In the Heights had played as well. So it opens on Broadway. We all know the rest of the story. We all know what has happened with Hamilton since then. But just to put some specifics on it, it was nominated for 16 Tonys. That was a record.
That's insane.
16 Tonys. It was nominated in every single category that it was eligible for. So 16 Tony nominations, a record. Previously, that record had been shared by the producers and Billy Elliot, but the 16 nominations for Hamilton shattered that. It was nominated sometimes twice in different categories. So it was just an unbelievable, from top to bottom. Everything was outrageously successful. It won 11 out of 16 Tonys that it was nominated for, which ain't too shabby. But because it did not win 12 like the producers still holds the record for the most Tony Award
wins. Which is so funny. The producers.
I know. You know,
love the show, but
producers. Right. I think the producers was just
the right year.
It was perfect timing. It was perfect timing. It really was. It had all the things.
If
it was
you think about it,
yeah.
This is the year that Cynthia Erivo won her Best Actress
in 2016.
It's the same year, and you know, the only reason that didn't go to a Hamilton person is because it was Cynthia Erivo. You know, like,
yes,
it was just kind of that moment where they were up against, you know, some pretty serious competition.
Yeah.
and still walked away with most of them. I remember everybody being like, tonight is Hamilton's night.
That's right.
So let's just see how many we can
one of those
up.
nights.
I think everybody was pretty surprised that they didn't, walk away with everything.
Yeah, but they walked away with a lot of it, most of it. So at any rate, in addition to its 11 Tony Awards, it won the Pulitzer, as I've already mentioned. And then it, of course, has had enormous impact. Like when it first premiered, we were seeing the Schuyler sisters performing. Was it at the Super Bowl or something? Maybe the World Series, the Schuyler sisters performed the national anthem or America the Beautiful, something.
That's right.
I mean, it was just everywhere in places that we don't often see representation from Broadway cast, right? It was just culturally enormous. And there are so many more things that I could say about the creative use of social media and the use of things like Ham for Ham, which were little mini concerts. Remember those? Little mini concerts. Yes, for people who came to stand in line for rush tickets, they would do little concerts, and you might be surprised and see Renee Elise Goldberry come out and sing for you, or Brian Darcy James, who had been in the company at Public Theater and left to do something rotten, so he didn't transfer to Broadway initially. He might come out and do a number because he was around. There were just
King George the Third, the First.
That's right. Exactly.
So there's a long running joke that every new King George, they just add the number to him. I was King George the Third, the 15th or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
So there was not only Ham for Ham, there was EduHam, where they made educational services available to students in and around New York so that they could come and see the show for $10 and get, education about the founding fathers. I mean, there was so many innovative things just outside of what was happening on stage that this show did. And maybe that's a topic for another conversation. But at this moment in time, I'm just really proud of us for getting through Hamilton in, right about an hour. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to extend it for a minute because I got two things
to say. Go for it. Let's hear it. What you got?
First, to piggyback on what you're saying there, a lot of these EduHam, Ham for Ham, shut down a little bit earlier than that, but EduHam, all of the different kind of things around it really does come to a screeching halt in 2020.
Yeah, of course.
When we hit the pandemic, because then the Richard Rodgers obviously goes silent for a year and a half before we reopen the theaters, which is just insane that we did that. I'm still just look back and go, oh my gosh, there's going to be so much written, so much. But the fact that it's like Hamilton came back, they started running again. They're still running. We had talked about this earlier. We don't know if, how long, if they're gonna break some of those records, but I mean they're doing well. I don't think they're not on the top 20 or anything yet.
Not yet. I mean, it won't be long. It won't be long, but not yet. I don't believe.
But even with a severe disruption, Hamilton is still a big name on Broadway. Still, it still commands some of that. Another thing that I want to point out is that because there is so much embedded in the music from hip hop and hip hop culture and pop music, there's so much from kind of popular music outside of musical theater that it's so easy to miss references. And I want to make sure that if you're going to go see Hamilton for the first time or even for the second time, that you're not put off by this. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be sitting there, you're going to be enjoying yourself, you're going to watch, and somebody next to you is going to go nuts and start being like, ah! Yeah. At something somebody says, and you're going to be like, excuse me, ma'am, could you please sit down? And that's usually because what has just been said may make total sense as far as the narrative, but it's from some bit of pop culture over here that you don't know about here. Actually, they ended up making, I think Kristin referenced it earlier, the book called Hamilton, the Revolution, which elucidates all the hip hop references that I did not have a huge background in hip hop, but at least I'd heard a lot of these songs and be like, oh, I've heard that before. Oh, that's a pop culture reference. But there were lots that just went straight over my head too. Had no clue. Yeah. But it is so helpful. My mother-in-law got this book because we got them tickets. And she was like reading through it, and she's like, I have so much more appreciation for what I'm seeing, because I'm starting to see everything that he's woven into this score from the background. So even if I've never heard this song, I know that it's coming from this moment in Biggie's life. And my mother-in-law said that to me, and I was like, you know, I mean, it's like, okay, it helps. It helps to kind of show off how he's conceptualizing, you know, a new wave of kind of American creation. And so I think it's a really, really, it's a good book to get, especially if you're like, I know nothing about this.
It's great.
It really does help. So she'd sit there and she'd look at both sides of it. So even if you don't get the reference, don't get upset at that person next to you that's freaking out. Just know that it's a pop culture reference, and ask them to tell you about it. Yeah. At the intermission, and make it part of the experience, because it's going to happen a lot.
Yeah, it does. And you know, something with this show, this is one that I always recommend. If before you see it, listen to the cast album. You know, a book is super helpful. I love that book because you can read the whole libretto. It's all there. But if you can't get your hands on that, at least listen to the cast recording, because it goes so fast that what's going to happen is, if you're experiencing the music for the first time, you're going to be so caught up in trying to follow the plot with these lyrics that are just coming lickety split so fast, that it helps to familiarize yourself with the music before you experience. And I will promise you that it will make the experience of the show that much better if you go in with a little bit of understanding of what you're hearing, because your ears our brains aren't going to think fast enough with that first experience if you go in cold. So I do always encourage people to listen to at least some of it, so that you're you know, that much farther ahead.
Agreed.
Another thing that I want to say about this, and then I'll very quickly wrap it up, but we can't overstate, and we don't yet understand. There will be a lot written about this, but the economic impact of Hamilton, by which I mean how many, you know, theater companies across the US have sold out their entire season of shows because people wanted to see Hamilton. They knew, I'm guaranteed Hamilton tickets if I'm a subscriber. So I'll subscribe to the whole season so that I'm guaranteed Hamilton tickets. And we aren't yet at a moment in time when we can have that data to know just how significant that impact is. But I can tell you from working with theaters across the US that it is significant. The number of people, you know, theaters that went from, maybe they sell their subscriber series at 70% capacity, selling at 98% capacity because of Hamilton. Massive jumps. I mean, so the economic impact
these are not small theaters. These are not even the size of Broadway theaters. Broadway theaters are about 500, 600 seats. We're talking about, you know, in Pittsburgh, when it came through Pittsburgh, the Benedum Center, like seats 2,000 people, and every seat is filled. So that's the subscriber base that they're trying to deal with. Not, I'm trying to sell 600 seats. It's just, it's insane.
Well, and you know, the trickle down of that is that not only are theaters selling, you know, their entire season, but shows that were part of that season that might not have sold out are selling out because people are buying the subscription to the season, right? So it's exposing people. It's not only got a economic benefit for the theaters across the country, but it's got a benefit for those shows that might have gone unseen by a lot of people if they didn't get the tickets as part of the subscriber package. Right. So there is an enormous impact of this show that we can't even discuss yet because we just can't study it yet, but we will in the years to come, and it'll be a massive impact.
Yeah. We were talking before the episode started just about, like, Hamilton feels like a watershed moment. It does. It feels like an Oklahoma moment. It's perfectly at that right time. It's, you know, like, it explodes. And everyone sees it as significant. I'm still looking for somebody that goes, it's a flash in the pan. Like nobody,
yeah, right.
Everybody knows there's something about this. And I have my own ideas about, what Hamilton is going to look like, in the history books in 10, 15 years. But we just don't know yet because what happens afterwards. I think we were on a track where this felt very much like we were moving into, like from the 1960s when we got Fiddler on the Roof and, Cabaret.
Hello, Dolly and Gypsy and all that.
And then it starts moving into this activism kind of moment that's really, very political. It felt like maybe that's what we were moving into. And I was like, history's cyclical. Like, let's just watch this, watch this play out. And we'll see what happens. But then the pandemic happened and the pandemic changed everything in our lives.
Question.
And I don't think that we even understand what we lived through in those moments. But, that full stop halt, I think we're gonna have to see what Hamilton becomes afterwards, because what it was on a track to do is very different than what it's picked up and kept going. It's still very, very popular, but it's going to be an interesting thing to study. We come back to this, and this is going to be a fun one to see in 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes.
Look back and be like, okay, I remember that time. Oh, look what happened after that.
Yeah.
It's just going to be one of these great watershed moments that we talk about for a very, very long time. And it makes it worth it to see as close to inception as possible. And then later on down the line. So this is going to run at least touring. It's going to be touring for a while here.
Oh, no question. No question. All right. So on that note, we're going to wrap it up today. That'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Tune in next time. We'll be talking about 2017's Dear Evan Hansen by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. Until then, connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok and at Dr. Bway Podcast.